Hi, everybody. This is Mike Oppenheim, and you are listening or watching Coffin Talk Exit Interviews with the Living, a weekly podcast that explores how the way we view the afterlife affects the way we live our life here. And this week, our guest is Candice Raine, and she serves as the CEO of the Arizona Trauma Institute, whose mission is to revolutionize the understanding of trauma informed care and resiliency through authoritative research based education, fostering transformation in every life that they touch. She's driven by a deep commitment, and she has dedicated her career to reshaping the dialogue around trauma, focusing on hope and the power of transformation. Candice, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Mike.
It's a pleasure to meet you, and I really like what I understand from your bio, and I also just like our little pre-conversation chat. So I have a feeling we're gonna have a great chat today.
Yeah.
You've listened to an episode before, so you know we always ask our guests, how old are you, where did you grow up, and what generation, if any, do you consider yourself a member of?
So I am 49 years old. I grew up in Belgium, and based on my year of birth, I am a Gen X. I just don't know about all these generations.
Yeah.
So I did research it a little bit before the podcast, and apparently, yeah, I'm a Gen X. Apparently, I fit the characteristics.
Well, and it's further complicated because it's an American phenomenon to start doing that and calling people it. So as it
Mhm.
bleeds into international, I don't think a person born in 1965 in China is going to have much in common with a 1965,
But
Western Europe
I
or
I fit the apparently I fit the description. So I'm
yeah.
a Gen X.
So let's start with the Belgium connection. How long ago did you move to America, and like what is that process like? But really, let's talk about Belgium first. You grew up there?
Yeah, I grew up in Belgium, and I guess it's just life. I met my then husband, so my first husband in I think 1999 or 98, something like that, and he really took me out of Belgium, and it's something that to this day I'm still grateful for. I we lived in Spain, Madrid, and then we lived in Milan. During that time, I worked in Paris. So it was a really rich life in experiences, rich in experiences. And then in 2002, um, that's when we got, moved to the US for work.
Mm.
At first, it was just on a visa, and just it's a funny story, and I like to tell it. For me, my only exposure was TV, right, to the US, and one trip to Miami, which is not really representative of the US. So when he told me, "Hey, we're moving to the US," I threw a fit, and I was like, "I am not moving to this crazy country." And once we first moved to Philly, and within a week, I told him I will die in this country. And I now call myself the most patriotic immigrant you will ever meet because I
Awesome.
love this country. This is my home. This is my country. And I'm waiting for the chips that you can implant in your brain so I can pick my American accent.
That's funny. And it's extra funny because I was about to start asking you language questions. I was a former ESL teacher for 10 years.
Oh,
So I
nice.
have I have a master's in like bilingual training and stuff like
Mhm.
that. So anytime I meet someone like you, I'm like, yes, I get to ask all my favorite questions. So I'm assuming French was your first language, but if it wasn't, is did you also concurrently learn English and Spanish, or were those later?
So I grew up until I was 4. I only spoke German.
Oh, German. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, Belgium has a
Yeah, so you're
small
from
German-speaking part on the eastern side. That's where I
cool.
was really raised at first, and then learned French, and that's what you're hearing now. So
Yeah.
I am bilingual French, German, and then English came a little later. So actually learned a total of 6 languages. But the thing is, I only retained those that I actually learned, you know. Um, at a younger age.
Okay. Yeah.
So I was fluent in Spanish and Italian when I lived there, but it's pretty much gone now. I couldn't hold a conversation.
Yeah. I understand. I speak some Thai, and I used to live on and off in Thailand, but if someone starts talking to me now, I can like it comes back, but it's slow and
Exactly.
it's not like anything worth showing.
Exactly.
So my favorite question to ask is, what language do you dream in, and how many languages have you dreamed in, and do you notice any correlation or anything like that?
I dream in three languages essentially. So English, French, and German. I'm always happy when I dream in German because that's probably the language I'm the most attached to because it relates to my grandparents. Um, and there isn't, I mean, the only, when I dream of my grandparents, I basically dream in German, but those are the only differences I see. Yeah.
That's really sweet. And then this is kind of a weird question, but you seem like you think about these kind of things. So if you don't, it's fine. But when we talk about like human identities, everyone can pick different things in different orders. So some people would be like, I'm a woman first, I'm an American second, I'm this third. Other people maybe would say race first and stuff. I have found actually that language, I think, is more unifying than almost any other identity marker. I'm just curious if that's ever occurred to you. So like if you were on a plane and there was someone speaking like German, French, and English, like would you feel like motivated to be talking to one over the other? Like does that play into your life at all?
You know, I don't know if I'm actually answering your question here, and please tell me
That's
if
okay.
I'm not. Um, First of all, a language is attached to a personality. I can tell you that I'm different depending on the language I'm speaking. And it's the weirdest thing because I would identify as being very authentic and really showing myself as I am. But if I start speaking French, I'm going to have different gestures. I'm going to different intonations, and then German is even different, right? So if I were on a plane and heard all three languages, the thing is I have different emotional attachments to languages. German is just, it's the warmth and the love of my grandparents. And so when I hear German, I feel very emotional and I feel very strongly attracted to that language because of how I grew up. So that would be more, what attracts me more at this point, after living in this country for 22 years, and being now surrounded, my second husband is American, and my son is American. We speak English primarily in our household. English is the language that I'm the most comfortable in expressing myself at this point.
Wow, that's really fascinating. I love the way you answer these questions, and I love that
Okay,
answer. No, you're awesome. I am going to move on to trauma, and I am going to move on to death because that is a huge part of our
yes.
show and a huge part of your life. But before we jump into those categories, um, I'm curious if when you say your personality changes, and I agree with that. So does that mean that you can almost like understand American culture if you're a foreigner by like hearing our language and like our expressions? Like in other words, like German has like Schadenfreude and like all these like psychological terms that we don't have. Like is that kind of like a part of that too? Like
Absolutely. And I'm an executive coach. I've been an executive coach for 12 years, and a lot of my clients pick me because of my international background, which then just leads me to do a lot of multicultural type of coaching. And absolutely, and when I work with my clients, we're literally talking about the German Candice, the French Candice, or the American Candice. There are some distinct differences, and the culture is directly associated to the language. I mean, it's very, but it's interesting how you have words. There are some words I prefer saying it in German or French or English. The
cool.
word accountability. I was trying to tell that to my brother the other day. There isn't a French word for accountability. There is,
No, no,
but
I believe you. I'm
people call
just
it
yeah.
responsibility, and I'm like, it's not quite that. It's stronger, you know. So
Yeah.
it's fascinating.
I also find that fascinating because I feel like right now in the year 2025, America's actually having a huge problem with accountability. I think that's like actually a
Well,
pretty like
let's not
hilarious.
go there.
Yeah.
Let's
No,
talk
no, but
about
I
that.
in a positive way. I think it's like funny that our own language can like help us solve our own issues. But
Yeah. Yeah.
but actually, and that was gonna be my last fun question about America, keeping it fun for sure.
Yeah.
What is a fun or funny or weird thing that Americans probably don't know that we're like that almost everyone else sees when they come here, but not like you come here for like 2 weeks to go to Disneyland or something. I mean, like when you're here for 20 years, like what's something that you're like, oh, below the iceberg, there's this funny thing in America that now I get, but I wouldn't have noticed or like that.
Um,
Or it could be nice, by the way. It doesn't have to be fun.
no, I mean, well, I have a lot of nice things to say about Americans. Um, and the list is long, but to keep it more on the fun side, so there are two things. One is visible. It's haircuts. You recognize an American from their haircuts. It's
I would never have guessed that.
European hairdressers in America. So that's one thing. And the second thing is feedback sharing. In Europe, we're just so much more direct.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And in the US, I will never forget the first American job I actually got with, with an American boss. I was supposed to put together a PowerPoint slide deck. And he emailed me back and said, Candice, great work. I just made some slight changes. And he redid the whole thing. And I'm like, that's not great work. That's like, that sucks. you
That's
know?
so funny. Yeah, from the other side of the window, like when I was an ESL teacher, the first time I ever taught a German student, she just told me like something. She's like, "Your hair's messy," or like, "You're tight." Like I just remember it was like
Yeah.
so direct, and
Yes.
I started to tell her she was rude, and then I remembered cross cultural communication training and all, and so we worked it out. But it was, I still actually keep in touch with her, so it's cool. But I remember going home that day and like saying like, "Oh, I have the worst student ever. I'm never gonna like this person." Like I remember just
Yeah.
thinking like, so
Mhm.
yeah, that's cool. Well, thank you. That was really warm and interesting, and also I think it's really nice. America is famous, and we still are like this melting pot. We really are this place where people can come and
Yes, absolutely.
gather, and it's cool. It's fascinating to talk to someone like you with all of your knowledge. And then the other thing is like you're really like embedded into American culture with this career of yours, or at least this part of your career as the CEO. Let's start like completely at the top, just for like anyone listening at whatever education level they're at. How do you define trauma so we can start to talk about that word and what you do?
Absolutely. Trauma is um, basically the prolonged exposure that you put your body through experiencing toxic stress. And this exposure at some point makes your body go beyond the threshold where it's no longer capable of processing it in a healthy way, which then makes you develop, maladaptive behaviors and patterns that, if you don't address them, can really affect you in your life very dramatically and negatively. So, what it is not is a single event,
Mm, interesting.
right? So it's
Yeah.
it's really it's a longer term process that people go through, and when you look at it from that lens, you will notice that way more people than you would think are traumatized and are living with the results of that exposure and have never been invited to address it in a positive way and in a way that actually allows them to shed those patterns that they develop and look at life, their environments, themselves from a much more positive angle.
And so the first question that came into my mind is what is the earliest age where you can see the effects of trauma? So I'm not asking when trauma can start, but like can a 4-year-old show signs of trauma or is that too young?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. There is a myth out there, and that myth is that children are resilient. They're not resilient. They're masters at developing coping mechanisms.
Mm.
There's little survivors. And so what they're going to do is they're going to adapt how they show up based on the environment that they're in, which makes them look and seem resilient, but they're not. What they're doing is they're simply adapting and coping. The problem that we're running into is that because of how we approach childhood in general and how we look at it, we don't catch those behaviors early on enough. And so we carry those into adulthood. And that is when we show up as very dysregulated and with patterns that don't serve us. And the majority of them come from those formative years.
And that's what so I'm raising two daughters right now. One's 3.5 and one's 1. So I'm raising the 1-year old. She's not really like, I would argue she hasn't had any trauma yet that I would know of because it's a pretty basic life.
Mhm.
But the 3.5-year-old is definitely starting to test boundaries. And then every time I'm trying to like correct, punish, I have different words and different choices, but I'm not like the most like snowflake, like liberal West Coast dad in the world, but I'm definitely a product of my generation and I just don't want to yell at my kids. Like I don't want to like create that environment. I also know that being yelled at like in many ways helped me as a kid. I was like kind of a troublemaker. I like definitely understood that like when my parents really grounded me that one time, it changed the course of my life in a very good way. So I'm curious, one, am I giving my daughter trauma? Like, is that an inadvertent, like, impossible thing to avoid as a parent? And you have a son, so I'm expecting, your answer to be twofold. And then two, do you have any advice for other parents and people out there just in general with this kind of stuff? Like, specifically correcting behavior.
Yeah, correcting behavior. So first of all, I do want to put a disclaimer out there. I am not a licensed therapist. So this is not coming from a perspective of, from a therapist or a counselor in any way. I know my place, and those are boundaries I don't cross. However, I am a student at the King's College in London,
Oh.
and learning about neuroscience and psychology of mental health. But I wanted to put this disclaimer. However, the reality is, it is important when you are a parent to just know your place as a parent. Okay, there are many, many different parenting styles. There are some things that are common that will help you create resilient children. Being an engaged parent, being a parent that has boundaries. So when you don't feel like yelling is not the, I mean, I wouldn't even recommend it. I don't think it's the best way to do things, although you said it might have served you. But as long as you still show your daughters that there are clear boundaries and that there is a clear structure within which they can operate, that's what really matters. And that when you explain things, it comes from a place of engagement and presence from you, right? One of the things, so I learned about all this late in life. So I had already, quote unquote, messed up my kid by the time I, felt like I was ready to be a parent. And, I actually did what they call filial therapy for a couple of years. And filial therapy is I basically relearned how to be a parent, but from this new perspective of being trauma informed. And what I learned, the biggest lesson I learned was boundaries. I was explaining too much to my son. I was explaining every single step of things. And she really taught me how a child doesn't have the same brain structure as you as a parent. And so you cannot expect them to understand concepts the way you explain them and the way you understand them. And so keeping things age appropriate and with boundaries, knowing your place as a parent was huge for me, and it has completely revamped the way I am parenting my son, and it's actually going really, really well.
Well, I don't know if German or French has the word resonate in it, but you are resonating so well with me with that. I mean, that was like literally four different things you said came up today with my wife and I. And it's also, as you know, like complicated because there's two of you. You definitely
Oh
don't
yeah.
agree on like, yeah.
Yep.
And then it's real time in front of them. And I'm like,
Mhm.
I don't know if we should give her the bagel. And my wife's like, it's just like, and then she's explaining why we didn't give her the bagel. And I'm trying to explain why, and you just nailed it. Like, she doesn't care. She just needs the boundary of, you're not getting this bagel. You threw a fit and blah, blah, blah. So yeah,
Exactly.
that's so cool. And that's also, yeah, it's interesting. I'm very grateful to my parents. They're still alive and they raised me really well and they loved my
Mhm.
brother and I. But I also I could easily point out like, 25 things that they each did that like aren't in like the parenting manual. So it's cool to like kind of relax sometimes and just know that like everyone's doing their best. And so what is the like I read your bio and I read what you do and like fostering
Mhm.
information and all that stuff. But like when you wake up in the morning and like if you're at a dinner party and you meet someone new, like when they ask you what do you do and you're really like intimately trying to explain what you do, like what do you feel like you do for trauma with your position? Want more interesting conversations? Head over to mikeyop.com and sign up for a premium subscription. You'll get bonus podcasts, essays, and other goodies. Plus, it's the #1 way to support the show. Just go to mikeyop.com, mikeyop.com, and click subscribe, and we'll send you a link. Thank you.
Well, hopefully I changed the world a little bit.
Cool. Yeah.
Okay. This is the work of my life. And so the core of what the Institute does is educating individuals. Okay. And the really cool thing about what we do is we're not just making it accessible to therapists and mental health professionals. It is, some of our courses are designed for them because, you know what they learned in university was not deep enough when it comes to trauma, so they need to supplement their learning. But it could be you. You could actually join one of our programs to better understand how to raise your daughters. It could be your neighbor who experienced very severe trauma as a child and who wants to heal. And so that's the really cool thing that we do is we make this curriculum and this knowledge and content affordable and accessible to everybody. And so we have an international student base, and they come from every walk of life. And so that is what I do. I just enable that. I make sure that this platform is going to be available for a very long time to our students that are growing.
I mean, that's fantastic. And I'm seriously going to go to your website after this conversation because I'm very curious. And my favorite thing is education, just in any form. I just like learning, and I'm always going to be this way. And speaking of learning and education, the mutual friend we have is Kirk Nurmi. He
Yes, my
sent you
dear
my
friend.
way. Yeah, just one of he's a mensch, he's a hero of mine. And
Yeah.
so every conversation we have, he and I generally migrates back to like, how are we treating prisoners? How should we like rehabilitate
Okay.
and stuff? So do you ever work with convicts or prisons or any of that kind of stuff with your career?
I'm so glad that you're mentioning it because it's so in this capacity as the CEO of the institute, there are certain things I would really like to get an opportunity to do, and one of them is to be able to create content for inmates that can be brought to them. I was made aware that now they have access to technology. They get tablets that they can use to learn things, and I would love there to be a whole section of our curriculum where we can really train them and teach them what is happening in their body when as a result of trauma when they get activated, because a lot of those individuals experience severe trauma in
Yeah.
their childhood, and being in jail is just a product of that. And so allowing them to do this work while they're still incarcerated so that when they come out they really get that real second chance, and not one where you're going to need to try to survive and make sure you don't get yourself back into one of those situations. That's a dream of mine. Schools is another one. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, there's
Mm-hmm.
so many different areas. The opioid crisis is another one that I
Yeah.
would love
Wow.
to be involved in some way, shape, or form. But it's going to be one step at a time. I mean, I've been the CEO for only a little over a year, so still have a lot here ahead
Well, that's
coming.
great. Yeah, no, and as a fellow person in entering the prime of their career, it's like really exciting to have the confidence and the desire to do all this because I think when we're younger, we have a lot of weird confidence and maybe a lot of desire, but like the two kind of come together in your 40s, and I feel like it's a great time to have someone like you.
Totally.
So,
Yes.
and so kind of like you've mentioned the body and trauma, and this is a quasi spiritual podcast because I personally believe that we have like a body and a mind, and then most of my questions are about the other third
Mhm.
link, which would be, do you have a soul, a spirit? Where do you go when you die? And again, I don't profess to have a strong opinion one way or the other, but we're pretty confident here on Earth that humans have a brain and a body, and we're talking about the interaction between the two because obviously the brain perceives a situation, and then the body would
Mhm.
feel trauma from that.
Mhm.
So what is your opinion of like spirituality and like a soul and that kind of stuff? Like, do you A, believe in that kind of stuff, for lack of a
Mhm.
better word, and B, do you think that is actually a necessary component of healing trauma, having a spiritual side or spiritual development?
Mhm. Oh, wow. Those are two big questions, just so
Yeah,
you
you can
know.
answer them very separately if you want. Yeah, I'm sorry. I try to ask quickly so that I can back off and let you talk. So,
Yeah. Um, yes, the answer is yes. I do believe in that, and I spirituality is a huge part of my life. From when I was a child. When I was a child, I was convinced in some way. It was like a knowing because nobody ever told me that when you die, you know everything.
cool.
It was the weirdest thing. Like I knew that when you die, things open up for you, and you just know everything that you need to know. And then things faded away. My late father, God bless his heart, he is in he was a Pentecostal. And we have a beautiful story. We didn't get along at first, but the last 15 years of his life, we had the strongest relationship ever. Um, but the reality is, when I was a child, he was a Pentecostal in Europe, and it's a very, very harsh environment to be in. It's very fear-based, right?
Hmm.
So I took a bit of a break there, and then as I became a mom, I had this awakening. I was like, there is no way, there is nothing when you give birth to a child. You're like, this is
Yeah, yeah.
so big, and so I started, like, again, looking into things again, and then I started being guided. And that's something Kirk and I talk about all the time. It's,
Huh?
I literally hear a voice that guides me.
Wow.
And it took me to many different places, but where I am now is I am a Christian, but I'm not. It was very important to me that I could live my faith the way I felt guided to live it, which is in a way that is very, um, very loving and accepting, and where it is understood that it is not my job to judge anybody,
Mhm.
and to really embody that spirit, that I believe Christ brought to us by just showing that elevated compassion. And so, to me, the work that I do with the institute, it's 100% spiritual. I have a business partner who is our founder, Dr. Roten. He's the one who founded the institute. He's the one who gets all the credit. um, we joke often. We're like, yeah, there's a third business partner,
Ah, I like it.
because I feel, and it's very strong and it's very direct. Like, I was told to leave Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and move to Arizona 7.5 years ago. And what I've learned is, when I follow this voice, beauty comes out of it. So spirituality is huge for me. Um, do I believe it's a necessary component for healing? I cannot say that.
Mhm.
I
That's fair.
cannot say that, because that, to me, makes it feel like I'm pushing something onto someone, which I would never do. But it would definitely help. Whatever it is you feel attracted to, believe. It does. Like, the belief that there is something higher and bigger, I believe, helps in your healing. It gives more meaning to things, right? So I live with complex PTSD, and so this is none of what we teach. I don't do myself, right? Um, and being able to say that something happened for me and not to me was the biggest transformation in my life. And there is a huge spiritual component to that. And I'm not sure you can actually make that statement and believe it if you don't believe that there is something higher than you.
No, it's fascinating. Real quick, just because it's a fun tidbit. I went to the University of Pittsburgh, so when you said Pittsburgh, that was cool. I
Oh,
don't
I love
often
it.
meet people. Yeah, so
I love
um,
Pittsburgh.
yeah, me too. I hate the winter, but I love Pittsburgh.
Mhm.
Arizona. It's funny to know someone who lived in Pittsburgh and lives in Phoenix now, like because
Totally.
that's yeah, it's like could not be more opposite.
Right?
But back to like what you were talking about. It was really interesting to me that you talked about like hearing voices because I was actually talking to someone about this yesterday. I have thoughts that aren't mine, and so it's not a voice; it's like a thought. And I am guided by them, and I used to ignore them, ridicule them, and then pay severe consequences. I'm curious, did you used to ignore them? Do you ever ignore them? And I know for you, you said it's a voice, but
Yeah, it's a voice, not it's not plural.
okay,
Uh,
I understand. Yeah.
it's a voice, and yes, I have ignored, because I didn't have the faith that I have today.
Hmm.
And whenever I ignored it, I paid it. I paid it
Yeah.
big time. And so I now, sometimes, and what's really beautiful is my husband, my son, my business partner, people that are really close to me. I can literally tell them, look, I know I should be doing this, but I'm hearing the opposite, and I'm going to follow that. And
Yeah.
it has never failed me.
Yeah.
Never, ever have I been failed by the direction that I have received. And so now I don't even question it, you know?
Yeah, and part of why this podcast will never veer into an awkward political conversation when I brought up accountability is that I, like you, don't believe I can judge anyone. And so it's impossible for me to,
Mhm,
I can try to make sense of the situation in America and I can
mhm,
try to have compassion and awareness. But like
mhm,
you, I wish more people would follow this internal mechanism that
mhm.
is in all of us. I even believe I'm not a
Absolutely.
biblical person, but the story of Abraham and the sacrifice to me is just a metaphor for exactly what we're talking about. Like,
Mhm, mhm.
follow that voice. It would never tell you to kill your son. It would tell you to do weird things, but it would stop you and divert you. So,
Oh yeah, some of it is really weird. You're right.
yeah, yeah, no, that's
Like
why, because it
moving
is weird.
across the country,
Yeah, yeah, like that.
with nothing.
Yep.
But yes, I too wish more people were more focused on that than looking at others.
And then so we kind of danced around it, but I want to make it clear to our audience because it is really fun to ask people this. So, do you still believe that you're going to know everything when you die? Do you have a slightly tailored or different version? What do you think is going to happen when you die?
Um, so I believe yes that you gain an elevated awareness that you don't have when you're here. Absolutely. Um, and what happens when I die? Um, I really don't know. And one of the things I have come to terms with is to not know it all.
Mm-hmm.
Now I have assumptions. One is I have a feeling that I will be meeting with Christ. That I believe that.
Mm-hmm.
Now it is not very. I mean, when you read or listen to more, like religious, speeches or scriptures, you're not supposed to right away. But I do believe that, and I believe in the life review.
Oh, cool.
I
Yeah.
do believe in the fact that you're looking back and you're like, okay, how did I do?
Yep.
Um, and I've had a profound knowing, and I cannot explain it differently than a knowing that the state you're in when you leave is the state you're in when on the other side. And
Wow.
when you read, and by no means am I a I'm just getting back into scripture, to tell you the truth. So I'm not an expert here,
Mm-hmm.
but when this emphasis on this one life, I have a feeling that's the metaphor for it. It's like it's not necessarily about that one life, but be careful what you get yourself into, be careful the state you get yourself in, because you don't know when your last day will be, and you certainly don't want to be miserable on that day. I don't know where I got that from, but this is something that I've carried with me since childhood. And so that's what I teach my son. It's like, all I'm asking you to do is seek happiness.
I love that, and it's like I used to I always got this really horrible feeling whenever I used to slam a door in high school, and I'd feel guilt because I'd be like, what if I slammed that door and that's the last thing someone remembers? And then when I was in my mid-20s, I was on the way home from something in the middle of a Saturday and a car ran a stop sign and hit me and I almost died. And I was supposed to go to a party and the kids at the party were like, "Oh, Mike flaked again. He didn't come," and they were mad. So they left me all these like mean voicemails, and all of them felt what I'm trying to evoke
Yeah.
to our audience, which is like, they had I died that day, they would have felt so bad for that. I didn't actually care. I thought it was funny because I used to flake and not go to parties. Like, yeah, that's like pretty valid. Like, so it was. But it is funny because I do think about that, and I've also had the life review scares me sometimes because I'll this was maybe 4 months ago. I really just wanted to watch the Pittsburgh Steelers game, the football
Mhm.
game, and my wife and my kids had something fun they wanted to do, and they wanted me to go, and I knew I should just go with them. I knew I should like not watch the Steelers game, but I also was like raised in the '80s in like male culture, and I was like, no, I'm a dad. I get to say I'm. So as soon as they left and the garage door closed, I just pictured my life review showing me alone in that room and how pathetic that is, that I was choosing to watch strangers on a screen and like not. And it was very interesting. So the life review thing to me is, even if you're not believing in it, it's a good way to look at situations. Like, would you really want to rewatch
Absolutely.
yourself? Yeah. So
And take it even a little deeper. Have you ever heard someone tell you, Mike, you said something there that literally profoundly touched me, and you had no idea of the impact that you had had in that moment, right? It can be positive and it can also be negative. I don't know all the people I deeply hurt. I
Wow.
have an idea, but there are some people I deeply hurt without even knowing, without even realizing. And the same goes for the positive stuff. And so um, if I'm scared about one thing, it's more finding out the stuff I wasn't aware of and that I could have done differently. But I mean, I'm not sure there's anything we can do other than just living a life of intention.
I just got goosebumps when you said that. I don't know if they're good goosebumps or bad, but that was something definitely resonated again there with that. That is like, I have really not thought a lot about that, but I do know that I've been shocked when someone I had a lot of resentment towards was surprised when I finally was able to, speaking of Americans not being direct, like tell them and also speaking of that, it is, I'm not saying like it's better to be direct or worse, but there is definitely, if you want to get through conflict quicker, it's usually better to just be direct, I think, with someone. We are running out of time, but I always give my guests the floor at the end. You can say whatever you want. You can talk about your work. You can just talk about a weird philosophy you have, anything you want. You have an audience that is listening to you and you have their attention.
Oh, wonderful. I will say that one of the biggest things I learned in life, it's just through the work that I do, but also in life, is we really don't know what happens in people's lives. And treating people with elevated compassion and in an intentional way. And that doesn't mean that we let people get away with murder. Accountability is always a thing, but really always catching yourself to the best of your ability and understanding that whatever that person is doing or saying, most of the time has nothing to do with you and everything to do with them and how they perceive the world around them and within them. And that has been a huge transformation for me. And then for each person individually, like make sure that you also take very good care of yourself. Self-care is something that it's a buzzword now and people don't take it very seriously anymore. And yet it's something that we should all absolutely um, take care of. And so, so this is what I would say. And, um, you know, continue spreading the love, Mike. I love it.
Thank you, Candice. It's so great to meet you. I love everything you said. You're very quotable. I wrote down like 100 things that I will cherish and remember. And thank you to Kirk if he happens to listen to this, or I will also send him an email. But it's great to connect with you. And again, there will be notes, anyone listening or watching, for how to find her and the wonderful Arizona Trauma Institute. And it's an education-based organization, so it's open to the public. You can learn, and you can learn about more of what Candice and her partner are doing, and the third partner. So thank you again, Candice, and thank you to everyone
Thank
who's
you.
watching. Yeah, absolutely. It's like, seriously, the more I do this show, the more I'm following some weird message. I can tell you that this was definitely not in the Mike Oppenheim template. So to everyone at home, thank you again. If you want to support the show, please head over to mikeyop.com. That's MIKEYOPP.com, and sign up for the once a week newsletter that is free. It includes essays and humorous content that I provide. Thank you again, Candice. Thank you, everyone. My name is Mike Oppenheim. You have been listening or watching Coffin Talk, and we will see you soon.